You know what? The debate about Wall Street reform. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for joining me. Walter Jones, Republican from North Carolina; John Hall, Democrat of New York, and we're going to be joined momentarily by Keith Ellison of Minnesota. The debate about Wall Street reform has centered around matters of high finance. Whether derivatives should be regulated, whether investment banks should engage in proprietary trading, whether the CFPA, the Consumer Finance Protection Agency, where should that be housed. But the number one issue that matters most for small businesses across this country, small businesses located in red states, small businesses located in blue states, small businesses run by men and women who are trying to make a difference and create jobs. The number one issue for them is whether they are going to get credit card protection. Just as Goldman Sachs and other Wall Street banks plunged the economy into recession with some of their reckless practices, Visa and MasterCard and the credit card industry have been ripping off small businesses for years. And today is in the finance reform bill, the question will be, are we going to stand up on behalf of the small businesses of America? The credit card rip-offs are enormous. Swipe fees are robbing the small businesses of nearly $2 on every sale. On many small sales, grocers and convenience store owners actually lose money. Some businesses have told me and my colleagues that they spend more on swipe fees each year than they do on health care cost. Now, the cost to consumers is equally great. Swipe fees cost Americans $48 billion a year. That is the highest swipe fee cost in any country in the entire world. They cost the average family about $300 a year. Last week, the Senate finally took action to crack down on out-of-control fees. They took up, in effect, the Welch Shuster provision that we had introduced in the House and incorporated it into the Durbin Amendment. And I'm delighted on that legislation that we were working on in the House. My colleagues here, John Hall and Walter Jones and Keith Ellison, were joined by others like Joe Barton of Texas in support of standing up for small businesses. What the Senate did last week by passing the Durbin Amendment on a strong bipartisan vote was the following. First, it would keep Visa and MasterCard from penalizing small businesses. It would allow our small businesses to do something very basic, offer consumers a cash discount. Two, it would set a minimum for small dollar purchases. Three, it would allow our merchants to use competing card networks. It would restore some choice for the consumer and some control for the merchant, and it would be beneficial to our consumers and to our small businesses. Second, the Durbin Amendment would direct the Federal Reserve to ensure that debit card swipe fees are reasonable and proportional to the processing cost incurred. And the heart of the problem that we face is not the validity of using a credit card. They're convenient for consumers and beneficial to our merchants. It's that the charges be fair, that they not be a ripoff. The bipartisan 64-33 vote in the Senate in favor of these common sense practical measures took many by surprise. But I'm not surprised, my colleagues are not surprised, that when the option was put in front of them, lawmakers made the choice to support small businesses and consumers, not the credit card industry. Today, we are calling on House leaders to support this amendment in conference. We're calling on them to take the bold but very necessary step to ban cash register ripoffs and put small businesses and consumers first. Now I'd like to ask my colleague Walter Jones to make his comments on this. And Walter, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Peter, thank you very much. When Peter Welch introduced the credit card interchange fee, Act, H.R. 2382, I initially was pleased to be on his bill before he introduced the bill. This has been an issue. I represent Eastern North Carolina, the 3rd District of our state, and I have heard about this interchange fee or swipe fee for at least the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years. And I would have merchants to come up to the office, as other members would have to come into their office and talk about how these fees or swipe fees or interchange fees, the same thing, how it was really creating a real problem. Well, I'm tired and sick and tired of seeing the big get bigger. And when I looked at last year, an estimated $48 billion was collected in interchange fees on debit cards and credit cards transactions. This is from Bloomberg. This is their figure, $48 billion. And here we have our small businesses struggling to keep the doors open. Here we have our consumers that are having a very difficult time making ends meet each month, and yet the big get bigger while the small get smaller. Last year, the average American household paid $427 in credit card interchange fees. That's from the National Retail Federation. Total interchange fee revenues have tripled since 2001. That is why I'm delighted to be here with Congressman Keith Ellison and also Congressman John Hall and my friend, all of my friends, Peter Welch. Peter is exactly right. It is time that the American people be heard. It's time that the hardworking American people be heard. It's time that the leadership hear from this group. And I want to thank Peter Welch. I want to thank Dick Durbin for taking the lead on this. It's a bill for the American citizens. It's the right thing to do, and I know there will be other Republicans. Peter mentioned Joe Barton. He is on the bill. There are other Republicans that would support this bill, in my humble opinion, because it's the right thing to do for the American people. And thank you very much for allowing me to be a small part of this news conference.
Okay. Thank you, Walter. And now a member of the Financial Services Committee, Representative Keith Ellison of Minnesota.
Peter, Walter, John, thank you all for coming here today to encourage our House members to stand up with the Senate idea around these swipe fees. Interchange fees represent a part of the nickel and diming of Americans. In many ways, many people don't even realize they're occurring. There's a widespread sense that swipe fees of the credit card and the debit card is free. Yet, it turns out that about 2% of every purchase is charged in the form of an interchange fee. When you start adding up how much the average American is paying for those fees on the right and on the left and everywhere else, while wages are stagnant, these fees are going up. Unemployment is escalating, and every penny counts for the local community and the average household. Last year, Visa and MasterCard paid about $19.7 billion on debit card transactions, and Visa and MasterCard in turn passed on about 80% of that, or about nearly $16 billion to banks that issue the cards. Some people think they don't have to worry about this fee, but when the bank charges the fee to the store then passes the fee along in the form of higher prices on consumers. We are all paying higher prices because of interchange fees. The small businesses themselves are less likely to be able to grow and make a profit as the result of these fees. It all adds up, and for too long, no one has stood up for regular folks and small businesses. Big banks and credit card companies have had their day in the sun, and today, now, we're calling on our colleagues to help the consumer and small business to get their day in the sun because they are the engine of our economy. We know what we're up against. The banks and the credit card companies are going to be pounding the pavement, walking the halls, knocking on doors, talking about why they should continue to benefit. But we ask our colleagues to stand up for the average worker and small business person. The Durbin Amendment requires the Federal Reserve to limit credit card interchange fees and allows retailers to offer discounts to customers based on how they pay for their purchases. Now, I would like to see the interchange fee law going even further and target credit card interchange fees as well. The same rationales for this legislation apply when it comes to debit cards, apply equally to credit cards. The language of the Senate bill simply requires that fees be, quote, reasonable and proportional. That's reasonable. Reasonable and proportional sounds reasonable to me. The question is simply how much political will we can muster to stand up to the credit card companies and the big banks. We're here today to show that we are standing up and to challenge our colleagues to stand up as well. So again, Peter, John, Walter, thank you to you, gentlemen. Thank you to Senator Durbin. I believe we can win this.
Thank you. And John Hall from New York has been a lead sponsor and a champion of consumer rights. John.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter and Walter and Keith. And thanks also to Senator Durbin for leading the way on the Senate side. Last year's Congress passed the Credit Card Holders Bill of Rights, a bill I was proud to co-sponsor, putting in place common sense protections against credit card company abuses, such as banning unfair interest rate increases, abusive fees and penalties that were imposed upon consumers. I myself was a victim of one of those when I opened a statement and saw 29.9% APR on a credit card that I'd been paying off more than the minimum on time, and I'd been a customer of that particular bank and that particular credit card for more than 30 years. I went through what so many Americans go through, making that call to the 800 number, talking to a service representative, and then asking for a supervisor, and then asking for another supervisor, and then finally getting it lowered to something that's merely gouging, not necessarily usurial. But this is, even for our small businesses, even a bigger issue than the rate itself. I've been speaking to my Hudson Valley entrepreneurs and small business owners about these interchange fees that are imposed in an unregulated fashion and that take place every time a consumer uses a credit card for any transaction, costing small businesses an enormous amount of money, as you have heard. Some of our largest businesses report spending more on interchange fees than they do, as Peter said, on health care for their employees. The amount of money that banks collect in interchange fees has tripled from 2001 to 2008. I've heard figures varying from 38 billion up to 40-some billion, depending on the source, but any of those figures are alarming. They might impact a large business's balance sheet in a lesser way, but for a small business, this is a devastating fee. More oppressive than the size of the fees is their unpredictability. These additional fees can be tacked on to businesses if they do not make an arbitrary transaction quota, so such as you have a slow month. In the Northeast, we could have a couple of blizzards in the course of 1 month, and a restaurant, for instance, that would be, dependent on people being able to get out and drive on the roads to get there, could have a slow month. Their month could be even more disastrous because if they don't make the quota, they're charged an extra penalty for that. The credit card company can change the fee at any time with minimal notice, forcing these small businesses to potentially scramble for cover to make up the difference. When I visited a local restaurant in Poughkeepsie, New York, and spoke with its owner, Frank Fasano, he told me about the difficulties he faces and how challenging it is for a restaurant to survive in this economy without having to pay additional charges and unfair fees. It's time for this to change. I call upon our Speaker and Majority Leader and Minority Leadership and conferees on the House side to work with the Senate and adopt the language from the Durbin Amendment. I'd like to thank Congressman Welch for introducing the Credit Card Interchange Fee Act to finally set standards on the fees that the credit industry imposes on our small businesses. I'm pleased to see that it's included in the Senate-passed Financial Regulatory Reform Bill. We gave consumers a credit card bill of rights, but financial regulatory reform will not be complete unless we pass a small business bill of rights, including regulations on these interchange fees. So I urge our conferees to represent this point of view strongly in conference and put this provision in law. Once again, thank you, Congressman Welch, and also to Walter and Keith.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. Any questions? Yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
First of all, how many signatures do you have so far in your letter? And secondly, are you concerned that the Durbin Amendment targets the debit fees but doesn't limit credit card fees?
Two things. One, I'll get to you on the number of signatures that we have, but we're making real progress on this because the game has changed. I mean, after we got this strong bipartisan vote in the Senate, it was a real indication that this had strong momentum. And I think that was in part made possible because of revelations that came out about some of the practices on Wall Street that were unfolding as the Senate was considering the language. Secondly, my preference would be to include the credit card side, not just the debit side. But keep in mind, there's some very, very solid protections on the credit card side. Discount, a cash discount. That's going to help our merchants, and it's going to help our consumers. You're going to be able to, a merchant's going to be able to set a minimum on the purchase. So somebody coming in and buying, and this happens, a cup of coffee and a donut may not be able to use the credit card, and that's reasonable for the business. And the businesses are going to be able to use competing card networks. So ideally, we have the debit charges at, quote, reasonable and proportional apply across the board. But having this apply to debit transactions, as it does in the Senate-passed amendment, is tremendous progress.
What would be stopping you from asking for them to include the credit card?
Well, we can ask. This is going to be for the conferees, and I think the baseline here is the Senate was successful in getting this very helpful legislation in. So can we get more? We might be able to. Oh, yes, sir.
The process, or the conferees, what's the process going forward to ensure that both leadership and the conferees are aware of your position, meeting with them, the staff meetings?
We're gonna seek meetings. I've talked to Chairman Frank. We'll be doing lobbying. Mr. Ellison is a member of the committee. We'll be contacting conferees, and we're going to be asking our merchants who are in red states and in blue states to contact their members and let them know this really means a lot to them. I mean, this affects every small business in America. Yes, sir.
I was just sort of surprised in the Senate. The vote breakdown was very different than we usually see. I mean, would you predict sort of a similar dynamic in the House? I mean, it's sort of...
Well, I think what Walter, I thought what Walter said made a lot of sense. You put this on the floor for a vote. And we have a chance to stand up for our small businesses or the big banks. I think you're going to get a very solid bipartisan vote. And look at the cast of members. We've got Walter Jones, we've got Joe Barton, we've got Bill Shuster. And as you said, I think a lot of folks, given the opportunity, are going to want to stand up for their small businesses. I mean, these charges really are a ripoff, okay? And the credit card companies have been able to do this because they have a monopoly, in effect.
Market power.
It's market power. And what we're talking about is restoring competition. So I think Republicans and Democrats are in favor of competition. Our small businesses are in favor of competition. Consumers benefit by competition. And basically what we're doing is busting up a monopoly.
If I can very quickly just add to what Peter said, if you think about the fact that this has been a concern for years and years and years, I've been here 16 years. The way this place works is the people, when they finally understand that Congress is listening to them, they get energized. And that's exactly what happened when Peter put this bill in. That's what happened with Senator Durbin's success on that side. We've got some energy now. And that's why I think with the leadership and Peter and others, and a little bit from our party as well. Yes, sir. I think that business owners, the small business owners, have been energized. They've seen some success, they've tasted success, and they want to see this thing go across the goal line.